afternoon. Thank you for joining us this afternoon for another episode of Ask the Experts, the Nutrition Edition. My name is Lisbeth Irish, and I'll be your host today. I am a registered dietitian with the New York State Office for the Aging and the SNAP-Ed program manager for our agency. Today, we're going to talk about container gardening, and I have three incredible experts with me. Jelisa Cabrera from the New York City Department for Aging and Tamara Elkin, also from the New York City Department for Aging. Both Jelisa and Tamara are nutrition educators for the SNAP-Ed program in their region. I also have Susan Hammerslag with me today. Susan is the nutrition coordinator for the SNAP-Ed program in Delaware County region, and is a very experienced gardener. We're going to have a very interesting discussion about different ways to grow herbs and vegetables in containers at home. We're also going to answer your questions about container garden later in the program, so be sure to start putting your questions in the chat. But before we discuss container gardening with our guest and answer your questions, I want to share a few basics about container gardening. Did you know that you can purchase seeds or seedlings for herbs and vegetables with SNAP benefits? I do suggest checking with the store where you plan to buy the seeds or seedlings to make sure that they're set up to use your EBT card before you visit. Planting your seeds or seedlings and watching them grow can be a truly wonderful experience. I love doing it, and container gardening is perfect for those of us who don't have a lot of space for gardening. Harvesting herbs or vegetables and using them in the food you prepare is nutritious, economical, and fun. Like I said, I love doing that. If you have young children who visit or have some in your household, they might love being involved in the process of planting and growing and harvesting and even preparing the foods with what you grow. I'm going to show you a little slideshow just to get us started. Slide one. Whoops, that's not slide one. There it is. Let's talk about the basic how-tos for container gardening. Don't forget to put your questions in the chat so that we can answer them a little bit later. First, you need to gather your supplies, so we'll need slide 2 for that. There you go. Seedlings or seeds, containers with drainage, potting soil, water. And for this demonstration I'm going to show you in a minute, you might want a pencil, and I'll explain more, or the video will explain more in a few minutes, or a small shovel. And the optional supplies might be a plastic bag and a marker. Let's watch a great video from the University of Arizona Cooperative Extension in Cochise County for how to plant container garden seeds. Next slide. Oops. There we are. Now we're going to see the video that I just mentioned. I love that video. I like the use of the pencil because I always get dirt in my fingernails that just will not come out. And it gets you just the right depth when you just use the eraser part. And now we're going to see another great video from the University of Arizona Cooperative Extension, Cochise County. This is for planting seedlings. Hi, didn't you love that video? I love their videos because they're so practical, using a knife, using a pencil. I liked how they teased apart the root, the seedlings. Usually I just plop them in the dirt, and that's probably not the best way. Those roots are probably all squished up together. So I like how they show how you tease them apart a little bit. I learned some things from that video, even though it's very simple. What did you guys think about that video?
Me too. I think they say that when you buy those seedlings, it's too many plants together to really thrive. So they do suggest breaking it apart, but I think that nobody really does it. And that's why none of our, the ones that we get from the supermarket really ever make it beyond, a week or two.
Yep, I agree.
Yeah, they usually fight for nutrients in the soil.
Yeah.
So it's better to separate them.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, Susan, when you grow from things from seed and then you put too many seeds in the pot and then they all start to grow up together. I mean, I used to think more was better, but apparently not based on the results I get. So you really should separate them, or
you really should separate them. And just the way that she showed, you want to make sure they're well watered before you try to separate them, and gently separate into either smaller clumps, depending on the variety of seeds you planted, or into plants, each individual plant.
I think it froze. Individual plants, I think, is what you're going to say.
Mm-hmm.
Whoop, we're losing Susan.
Sorry.
Well, I'm sure she'll be back. Oh, there she is.
Yes, definitely individual plants, and be sure they're well watered, and well watered once you've planted them in their new homes also.
That's good. Well, I'm going to ask Jelisa and Tamar to talk about an interesting container garden project that they did in their region last year. Can you tell us more about your mushroom container garden project?
Yeah, that was a new idea that we had, where as opposed to herbs, we chose mushrooms. and we worked with the supplier out in Queens, so they were nice and locally grown. And they came, Jelisa, do you remember? They came in these bricks wrapped in plastic.
Yeah.
And not what we were expecting, but the directions were to make an X and spray. And then you just leave it. I think you sprayed them twice a day. And
Yeah.
you just leave it. They don't need sunlight. And there were, I'd say, a handful of people that threw them out because they looked a little moldy, but that was like a natural part of the process. Some people put them in the freezer because they weren't sure what to do with them. But we actually, those pictures that we just showed were our success stories. I mean, those are real mushrooms. These were blue oyster variety,
Beautiful.
and they were so cool. And for the ones that really got it, they were very successful. And we even learned that you could flip it. Once you harvested these, you could do the X on the back of the brick, and that would grow as well.
Yeah,
Wow.
for sure. The distributors are from Queens, New York, down in the city. So they're mushroom queens. You can find them at Grow NYC markets, especially Union Square. And like Tamar said, they love humidity. They don't need sunlight, so you can grow them even in the winter to make sure they stay moist, not wet, but moist. And they have other varieties. So they have like lion's mane, which are very fuzzy and kind of look like my hair. um, and so they're really, really fun to grow out. I think they're a great project for any age group, honestly. And yeah, like you see in the pictures, it's a really good project. Really, really fun.
Yeah, so one of the reasons we chose them also, living downstate, most of us live in apartment buildings. So we are not blessed with much room or much sunlight or an access to an outdoor space. So it was a nice
Exactly.
alternative to, trying to cram as many things on our windowsills as we could.
Yeah, yeah. For sure, I agree. And not only that, you can purchase them with your SNAP benefits. So if you go to any farmer's market, you can use your SNAP benefits to purchase, like Lisbeth said, herbs, mushroom kits, and you can get up to three, I believe, three harvests. They get smaller with each harvest, but it's amazing. You can saute them. We did Zoom workshops with some of the participants. We did cooking demos, and you can add them to almost any dish.
Yeah, we used a great snap ed recipe. Um, it was a bulgur mushroom pilaf right off the
Ooh,
snap ed recipe website. It was fantastic, and it was so cool because we got to use mushrooms from our windows.
wow. We made stuffed mushrooms at home yesterday, and we put spinach and things like that, a little bit of Parmesan cheese, a few breadcrumbs. Um, but stuffed mushrooms are great. I mean, we had them as a vegetable side dish kind of thing.
Yeah, and it's really inexpensive.
Yeah, very economical in the big picture, because they can be pretty pricey when you buy them yourself, especially those interesting varieties like the ones that you had on your bricks there.
Yeah, those were blue oyster. And like Jelisa said, there were a few other varietals as well.
Hmm.
I think that's a great idea for, I bring my herbs in the fall and they last until about sort of January. But after January, the things I bring in, there's just not enough sunlight in my apartment. So I think mushrooms would be a great, sort of January, February, March kind of, growing season for me. Because I get kind of sad when my herbs are, looking kind of not so good anymore. And it's too early to plant,
Right.
a lot of them outside yet.
Yeah, it's a good transition.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I love mushrooms. Oh my gosh. They're good for you too. Susan, I had a couple questions I wanted to ask you. One I already asked, but I also want to know, when the leaves on your plants start to turn yellow, that's kind of what happens to mine in January. I'm assuming that it's because they're kind of sad about the amount of sunlight they're getting. But is it something else I might be doing too?
or it may not be anything you're doing. Things like basil have a limited lifespan, and so
Okay.
they could be just at the end of their lifespan. It might not be
Okay.
your fault. Also, the soil becomes depleted over time as we water it. When the water drains out of the pot, it takes part of the fertilizer with it each time that it drains. And the short days really make it difficult for humans and for
Yeah, I got to go with that. The short days get me too. I think I start to turn a little different color.
A little yellow too.
Pale. I also noticed that in the video that we showed, they did bottom watering, and I've been reading more about that lately, like watering from the bottom. I always thought you didn't want your plants to sit in water, but that confuses me a little bit.
Well, that was a sample of a way to germinate your plant, your seed. So that water in the bottom of that bag would keep the soil moist until your seed has germinated and your first leaves have formed on it. You would need to keep an eye on that. It will be rainforest inside that bag, very damp. They had said not to close the bag completely for air circulation. So if it was too hot and humid inside of the bag, you would find that you would have some mold or mildew starting. So you would have to keep an eye on your little friends and make sure you have to check them daily and make sure that they're not suffering from too much moisture, and that you don't need to prop the bag open for a day or two and let some of that air out.
So once the seedlings start sprouting, then you would switch to top watering?
Well, or at the very least, leave the bag more open for them to have air circulation for a while. When they first germinate, they're so tiny, and keeping them in that little greenhouse situation like that would keep them from getting too dry accidentally, say during the day while you were away from home. But as the plant gets a little larger, then it's more able to regulate itself, and you could switch later to top watering. And
sounds kind of like raising kids.
I was going to say, becoming a plant parent is like raising a baby.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think I micromanage my babies. Sometimes I water them too much. I've tried using a spray bottle when they're seeds so that I don't, like make them float away.
Mm-hmm. And it's really best on the soil. It doesn't necessarily have to be on the leaves with the spray bottle.
Yeah, that's true. Well, those are great questions. Let me see. All right, let's see. Susan, do you have any particular tips that you think people don't know about container gardening? Things that just don't seem to come up.
You really, really have to check your plants every day. Say it's a particularly warm day, they might actually need to be watered twice in the same day, morning and afternoon.
You just check with your finger for the moisture in the soil?
Yes, and after you've checked with your finger, you'll develop you'll be able to tell with your eyes after you've checked with your fingers enough times. You can take a look often and say, well, the leaves are starting to bend down just a little and the top of the soil is very dry, so looks like probably needs water, and I won't even have to touch the soil to tell that. Another thing is that you do need to use fertilizer in a container garden. It appears like it's self-sustaining, but as I said, each time you water and the water runs out of the bottom of your pot, it does take some of that fertilizer with it, and so you do need to use some fertilizer. And you should never use your fertilizer on a plant that's wilted. If you're using water-soluble fertilizers, something that you mix with water before you apply it to your plant, you should be sure that your plant has been properly watered first, because the fertilizer will burn the roots and set your plant back. So
I sometimes use those little things you stick in the soil. They look like little 2-inch sticks. Are those okay to use?
Absolutely. You want to make sure whichever fertilizer you use is formulated for plants, though. You wouldn't want to poison yourself by eating your produce that you used inappropriate fertilizer, not meant for plants that are going to be consumed.
Yes, that's a good point. Yeah, you don't want to poison yourself by.
Right.
Oh, yeah, and that would be a problem. Also, I use the little granular. You don't add it to water, you just kind of sprinkle it on
The plants.
Some people say you can do fertilizer from, things like coffee grounds or eggshells, things like that. Is that helpful, or is that kind of not so much?
You can make lovely compost from those items, but putting them directly on your plant, I don't think a banana peel laying on top of your plant is. It takes a very long time for that to break down.
Good point. That's pretty ugly too, to be honest.
Gonna have
Would
fruit
it get
flies.
moldy? Yeah.
One of the things I like is that they're beautiful when they're growing. So I don't know that I would want that on my plant. Wow, that's great. Anything else that any of our experts would like to share about their experiences with mushrooms or, their own container gardens?
Let me ask you a question, Susan, about pruning, right? So like how often would you want to trim the herbs in the containers to make sure that we're giving them enough space? And
well, we'll go back to a basil plant just because that's an easy one to discuss. The first 2 sets of leaves grow. Then once you have the second set of leaves, you can pinch the center where it's continuing to grow straight up, pinch the center out of that, and then beside each of the leaves, a new shoot will come out. So then you'll have more. So each time you pinch, then your plant will become more bushy. If your plant has become overgrown, I would say don't ever take more than a third of it away in a single pruning. Let it recover after you've trimmed about a third of it off. Did I really answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
That's good to know, because I know sometimes you turn your back, particularly in the summer months, and a basil plant will be like this big, and then 2 days later it's gigantic. Because
I've gone and cut that totally down, thinking I was helping the plant, but never mind.
Yeah. Well, and sometimes what I do is if we're not going to use it right away, I freeze some of my herbs. Particularly dill grows crazy sometimes, and I'll, just wash it off and freeze it. And that, in most things I use dill in, it's fine. It doesn't, it might be a little bit squishy, but it's still tastes like
for soups, for rice, things that are moist anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Things that are cooked.
I think we have questions.
What's that? Chat. Oh, okay. We're going to, before we go to the chat, we're going to show a short video showcasing one of the New York City's container distribution projects, which helped older adults grow fresh herbs during the pandemic. It's a great video. I love that video. It's so great. It shows what you all do so well.
That one at the end with the basil plant, you could just tell by the smile on her face. She was so appreciative.
It's beautiful. That's how I feel when I look at something I have that I've grown. I do want to mention to our audience that New York State Office for the Aging has nutrition educators in many areas of the state, and they do container distributions, container garden distributions in many of our regions. If you want to find out more about those, you can always go on snapednewyork.org and look under NYSOFA, which is the abbreviation for the New York State Office for the Aging, and it'll let you know where we are located. Give your local office a call and see if there's a container garden project going on in your region. So the next thing we're going to do is get some questions from our audience. Let's see what we have here.
There was one that was interesting. Are eggshells a good container to start seedlings? What do you think, Susan? How's that for a compostable project?
It is. I think you would need to tease your seedlings apart that were in an eggshell, or break up that eggshell in some way without damaging your little plantlets. So, because it would contain, the eggshell will not break down as quickly as you might think, and it would make the little plants root bound inside the eggshell eventually if you just transplanted the eggshell and plants together. So.
Okay, so cute in theory, but not so practical.
Well, for a limited period of time, and that's fun.
Yeah. I also saw a question that we missed just a minute ago about how long should it take for you to see your seeds sprout?
Well, that's a trick question because each seed has a different germination rate. Carrots take 3 to 4 weeks, and basil sometimes can be very short in 3 days, or tomatoes sometimes as short as 2 or 3 days. So each plant has its own rate, just like people.
We did radishes, right? Or do radishes grow quickly too?
They do germinate quite quickly.
And I know when I planted cilantro, it took forever. So, I almost gave up on them, and then they sprouted.
Yes.
Don't give up.
No. Always give it just a little longer at least.
Here's another good question. Oops, sorry.
They said, here's one. Do you put these containers on your windowsill to monitor them? Yes, I think that's a great idea. And if so, when do they go outside? That's a very good question.
So they, on a lovely day like today, your plants could go outside. It's a little too sunny if they haven't been outdoors at all yet. So you would want them to be maybe under a porch roof or some shade somehow. After they've been outside a few days like that in the shade, then they should be able to tolerate full sun. Where I live in Delaware County, it's still possibly going to frost any number of times, and even potentially snow. So I have to keep track of the weather, and if it's going to be too cold at night and frost, that would kill my plants, and I have to bring them inside at night and then back out the next day.
Sure, you get some exercise in there too, right?
That's the great thing about container gardens, because you can bring them in and out, as opposed to planting in the ground in a garden. They're in. You can cover them, but sometimes that doesn't work.
Absolutely. How often do you fertilize? I see that question. In the growing season and for vegetables and herbs, more often as once a week, is especially while they're growing rapidly this time of year. Later on in the season, then the fertilizer encourages growth. And so we don't want to do that with our herbs when we bring them in the fall indoors. There's so much less light. They really aren't growing anymore. They're more dormant the further into the fall we get. And so you can cut back on the fertilizer and maybe not even fertilize it at all, say in November and December and January, until the days start to get longer again.
Would you prefer compost or store-bought fertilizer you can get like at Home Depot or something?
Well, compost is great if you have the space and whatnot. It might be a little tricky to add to a container that you brought in the house for the winter. It might be a little easier to use store-bought fertilizer meant for food during the shorter times, or if the plant is only staying inside your house.
Someone wants to know how deep the pot should be if you're growing basil.
I'd like to err on the side of larger because I am not the best at remembering to water. so it's less likely to get dried out, but you can do basil in a large basil, allow a plant to get quite large in a pot as small as 6 inches deep.
So you could use a large yogurt container or a cottage cheese container, right?
Yes, either of those would be a good size.
Great. I like those things that you're making use of something instead of throwing it away.
Upcycling.
Yes, definitely.
Can I just throw in an important question I saw in the chat as well that has to do pretty much kind of what we're talking about right now? Someone asked, can you freeze basil in ice cube trays? I mean, I definitely would suggest, especially if your herbs grow kind of out of control, and you can use olive oil or any kind of oil you like, and even a mixture of like olive oil and butter, of both. And so like that, you don't have to dry your herbs and then throw them away. And sometimes some herbs also lose a lot of their flavor when they're dried, like cilantro, for example.
Right.
So freezing could be a better option too.
Banana water, good for nutrition for seedlings.
That's a little bit of a trick question. Bananas, unless you're buying organic bananas really have a tremendous amount of pesticides on them. And it's going to be concentrated on the peel where it was sprayed. So I would probably pass unless you're buying organic bananas.
Good to know. Can you keep carrots in a large container until maturity?
It would have to be deep. It would have to be a deep container. Even radishes are not always comfortable in a smaller container. They don't always make the radish on the bottom, and your carrots may not actually make a carrot. They may just grow a lot of greens, which we know we can eat the carrot greens. We can make a pesto or whatnot from the carrot greens, but you may find that they do not ever actually produce a carrot.
I grew sweet potatoes one time because the leaves are beautiful. Mm-hmm. And then at the end of the year, I pulled out the plant and there was a small sweet potato, but nothing
cool.
I was going to eat. But I have a friend who had a huge pot and she got real sweet potatoes, even though she grew this sweet potato for the pretty leaves. They're really pretty green.
Yes.
How often do I water my container garden? Oh, we've talked about that a lot. Anything you want to add, anyone, to that question?
Definitely anytime it's dry or wilted, and probably once a day if it's outdoors. And don't be tricked by if it's a rainy day. If you say you have a tomato plant in an outdoor container, the leaves on the tomato plant may extend beyond the edge of the container and prevent any rainwater from actually or much rainwater from actually falling inside the container with the plant. So the plant may still need to be watered even though it was a rainy day.
Good point. That explains some of the results of my tomato plants. Wow, how'd they get so dry? We had all that rain. Yeah.
Yes. So how much sunshine will my garden need? Another question that it depends on what you planted. Tomatoes and your basil would like more sunshine. The cilantro doesn't enjoy hot weather, and so maybe as the weather gets warmer, it will do better if you've got it in a shadier spot. And keep it in the cool a little more, and be sure to keep your cilantro watered, because it really doesn't care for the hot weather, and it will go to seed and make a flower.
Oh, that explains why mine did that.
Yes.
Lisbeth, we might be better off if you tell us which plants you were successful with.
Well, I've been successful with all of those at one time or another, but it kind of depends on how much attention I'm paying to them and what kind of growing season it's been. You know, last year it was beautiful in upstate New York, so it was a great growing season. You know, everything loved the weather. And then the year before, not so much. You know, it was a little rougher to keep those things going and happy. So a lot depends on how quickly I get them out there. You know, there's a lot of factors in growing things, but it's not. Well, I think it is. I think it's just you have to pay attention a little bit and not overmanage them either. You know, sometimes I overwater because I get carried away. You know, I think, oh, it's going to be a hot day, and then I, drown them. So it really depends on, me. I'm a huge factor what I'm doing, and also the weather, and where you get your plants too. I have one place I get plants that they do very well, and then another place not so much. What you start with.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Seedlings. Yeah, and where you get your seeds too. That makes a difference. So what's the best way to store mushrooms? That's a great question.
I would store them in the refrigerator, but not too cold. They're pretty sensitive. So I would say sometimes when I buy them from the farmer's market, they do best in like a brown paper bag as opposed to a plastic one, so they can breathe a little bit better. I don't know, Susan, tell me if I'm misspeaking, but in the produce drawer, or like closer to the front of the fridge, so it's not sitting all the way in the back where it's real cold.
Yeah, and don't wash them as soon as you get home. Wash them right before just you're about to cook them.
I think that's a good rule of thumb for most things. If you wash them ahead, sometimes they get that too much moisture and they can mold or rot. We keep we buy shiitake mushrooms, which are a little pricey, at the farmer's market that they have at the workplace where I am now. And we buy them once a week, and they hold up really well in a brown paper bag.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say that's a good lifespan too. Don't go over a week. If not, then you get a little mushy and not too tasty. And I mean, you can still eat them, but probably in a soup but they're not as fresh tasting and scrumptious, or meaty is what I'm trying to say, meaty as they would be, the first couple of days, which is a great substitute for like ground meat.
Yes, we find that, the flavor of mushrooms is wonderful in vegetarian recipes. We put them in so many things.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any tips for container porch tomatoes? I know myself, I grow cherry tomatoes because the growing season in upstate New York is kind of short. And by the time I get them out there, it's even shorter. I don't know if you guys have any ideas on growing tomatoes.
Yes, I think porch tomatoes do better in a bigger pot.
Yes, absolutely.
There were some questions on dimensions, but bigger than you would expect, I think.
I totally agree with that. Mine did much better last year when I upgraded my size of my pot.
Yeah, for sure. I have some friends out who have I haven't tried these myself, but they take the big IKEA bags and they've grown two batches of tomato plants side by side. Another one with potatoes, another one with sweet potatoes. So I mean, you just have to try it out, get creative, you know.
Yeah, I love that idea. You poke little holes on the bottom of the
Hmm. Yeah,
And
and
the
make sure you have somewhere it can drain and not just drain on your floor or your fire escape or something like that. Yeah,
Yeah, or have your balcony go down into the person.
exactly. Yeah.
Yes. Any other? Oh, what about pruning cilantro or rosemary?
So rosemary, once again, try not to take more than a third of the plant. And cilantro, similar idea. Cilantro is one of those that you can leave it quite dense. When you plant your seeds, the seedlings can come up quite close together. Um, and if you just snip it off and don't leave any leaves below where you've cut it, then that will be the end of that cilantro plant. And I don't know that it'll come up from the sides or not. I usually for me the season's over by then. It gets too warm and it goes to seed. If you trim it above some leaves, then it will have the leaves to continue to feed the plant. Um,
Yeah.
and allow it to continue to grow for a bit.
I find with my cilantro, I have to stay ahead of it. If I let it grow too fast and I don't prune it, it goes to flower and goes to seed pretty fast. If I don't use it, don't harvest it pretty often.
There are a lot of questions about blueberry bushes. Would you say that's
Really?
something that wouldn't thrive in a container or a small pot?
I have seen in seed catalogs blueberry bushes that are specifically modified to be able to grow in a container.
Oh,
If you choose to buy just a regular blueberry bush that you happen to see at a garden center for sale, those are most likely something that's meant to be planted in the ground. And blueberry bushes have a very interesting, after they establish themselves in the ground, they create almost like a plate underground that their roots come out of the bottom and the branches of the bush come out up through the ground from this plate. It's like
whoa.
a giant frisbee type thing under there.
That's so cool.
Yeah, it is very, very interesting, but not, I don't see that being effective in a container.
Okay, so we need space for that.
Right.
Yeah.
But there are definitely a few blueberry bush varieties that are intended to be grown in a container, and you would have to find those specifically.
And I see we have some resources that are popping up on the screen. Our website, New York State Department for Aging, Office of the Aging, we have a great website, and also snapednewyork.org is great, especially if you need those recipes for what you've harvested from your garden.
Look for that mushroom peel-off.
Yeah.
Yes, excellent. I'm going to try that. And also just, all sorts of ways to use herbs and any vegetables or fruits you might grow. And I'm going to end now because I think we're getting close to time. I want to thank Susan, Tamar, and Jelisa for sharing their expertise and their time for today's episode. They're wonderful guests, as you can tell. And I hope they'll come back for an episode again soon. I also want to thank our audience for sharing their questions and thoughts. That's what keeps this show really interesting. We want to help you save time, save money, and eat healthy. So reach out, look at snapednewyork.org and find us. We have regions throughout the state. This episode of Ask the Expert was funded by the United States Department of Agriculture, which is an equal opportunity provider. Don't forget to like and subscribe to New York State Office for the Aging social media. And join us on May 12th at 1 p.m. for our next edition of Ask the Experts.
Hi, I'm registered dietitian Wendy Beckman, host of What's Cooking with Nysofa. Over the past 2 years, I've had the opportunity to share healthy, nutritious recipes with you on the show. I work for the New York State Office for the Aging, and thanks to a partnership with SNAP-Ed New York, our nutrition team reaches hundreds of thousands of older New Yorkers each year. So why a cooking program? 60% of health costs and related issues have nothing to do with health, but instead have to do with individual behaviors like our food choices and physical activity. The recipes we feature are nutritionally appropriate for older adults, meeting critical nutrition requirements for healthy aging. What I bet you don't know is that this show is only part of a larger effort. To help me explain what our nutrition team at the New York State Office for the Aging does and what a registered dietitian is, here is registered dietitian Lisbeth Irish.
A registered dietitian is a professional who has training and education in food and nutrition. To become an RD, you must complete certain requirements, including a minimum of a bachelor's degree from an institution that's accredited by the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. You must also pass a national examination and meet continuing education requirements. What does that mean? As RDs, we are qualified to offer accurate advice about nutrition, and we can help answer your questions about how diet can affect your health. At Nysofa, the registered dietitians handle many tasks. This includes hosting 2 online programs aimed at helping older New Yorkers make better nutrition choices. These programs are What's Cooking with Nysofa, which is our monthly cooking demonstration, and a Facebook Live program that I host called Ask the Experts, Nutrition Edition. In the months ahead, be on your lookout for it. We'll be sharing your questions and our experts' answers about nutrition and health. New episodes of Ask the Experts Nutrition Edition debut the second Friday of each month on Facebook and YouTube.
As Lisbeth explained, registered dietitians at Nysofa handle many tasks, including food safety at congregate meal sites, educational materials, and outreach. In the meantime, please don't miss an episode of either show produced by our team, What's Cooking with Nysofa and Ask the Experts Nutrition Edition. Every episode is uploaded to YouTube, and you'll find the archive shows there.
Do you have a question about foods? Or do you have a particular health issue that you'd like to improve by changing your diet? Tune in to Ask the Experts Nutrition Edition every second Friday at 1 p.m. We'd love to hear from you.
Remember, registered dietitians are the experts in nutrition. Visit for more sound advice about eating healthy on a budget.